StrayAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is how to be a renegade. Before we get into all of this, I'm going to remind you all of two things specifically. First of all, my daily motivation and Monday motivation messages guaranteed to have you focused, sharp, and on point to start your day or your week, respectively. All you got to do is be a member of my text community to get this message. My number is 305-384-6894. And once we start sending that message out again, everybody who's a member of the text community will be getting those messages. And you can even choose how often you receive them from us. And you can actually text back and get a response from me, because I do actually read through the messages and respond to some of them every day. Once we reactivate sending the messages, that's when that'll happen. Secondly, but you can text me right now, so you're already in. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. That is the place where you get your start with me, working with me directly, having me as your direct coach, getting access to all of our best frameworks and trainings, such as Bulletproof Mindset, 30 Days of Discipline, ASAP Confidence, 25 Hours, the Work on Your Game system, Next Mission system, the Business Builder framework, and 35 plus more and more that we are adding. You'll always have access to anything that we add as long as you're in the university. Just go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. That link is down below in the description as well. Getting into this topic, which is, again, the topic here today is how to be a renegade. Let me get the definition for the word renegade. I don't know why I didn't put this in my notes here, but I'll look it up real quick while I am giving this to you as an intro. A renegade is one who rejects a religion, cause, allegiance, or group for another, also known as a deserter, an outlaw, a rebel. Those are the definitions of the word renegade. And I give a hat tip. I'm going to give a hat tip to a man by the name of Dan Kennedy. He is a marketing guy who's at this point pretty close to retired out of the game, but his material has influenced a ton of marketers who are out there today. Even if you never heard of Dan Kennedy, you have been served by people who did learn from Dan Kennedy up to this point in their careers. There's plenty of marketers out there, young and old, who have been influenced by Dan Kennedy's stuff, even if they may not even know who Dan Kennedy is. I've been influenced by his stuff before I even knew who he was, because other people basically took stuff that they got from him and they would teach it. And then as I got into his stuff and I learned what he was talking about, and I know he came out way before them, I realized, okay, the stuff that I heard from these newer guys, they got it from him because he was saying it way before they did. And many of them have said they look up to him as a mentor or teacher. So anyway, his name's Dan Kennedy, and you want to look him up. He is not active on the internet, so you had to look this guy up in actual books. You can find his books on the internet, and you can find teachings given by him that maybe somebody else put on the internet. Dan Kennedy's not an internet guy, so I told you he was old, or he'd been around since before the internet was the internet. But anyway, Dan Kennedy has a program. One of his like foundational programs is what he calls the Renegade Millionaire. And that program is well known by a lot of longtime entrepreneurs who have been in the game for a while. So in the spirit of me, I was recently going through his Renegade Millionaire program, and I've gone through it more than once. It got me thinking about how can I take this concept of being a renegade and share it with you all, not his stuff, because his stuff was really about how to do it as an entrepreneur in the business. But I want to talk about it more on a higher level, just as a person. How can you be a renegade in a way that serves you, that actually makes sense for you? So again, hat tip to Dan Kennedy for planting the seed, but I'm making my own version of this in today's masterclass. Point number one. Topic, once again, is how to be a renegade. Number one, massive success is only possible when you decide to go against the grain and do so successfully. So this first point is really an understanding. It's not really something you have to do. So the understanding is, actually, before I get to that, you should understand that I often talk about, you hear me talk about the mindset being the foundation of anything that you're going to do successfully. It's being, then doing, then having, right? Be, do, have. This means you have to think a certain way first, then you do things, and then you get an outcome. So the thing that you need to think, the way that you need to think is understanding that when you want to achieve massive success, you have to make a decision at some point, somehow, somewhere, to go against the grain and be successful when you do it. Go against the grain successfully. How can you go against the grain in a way that you end up actually winning in the process? So you don't want to just go against the grain and do the same as you would have done, or go against the grain and be worse. You want to go against the grain and win. So we know that the opportunity in life is always in the opposites. I explained that in episode number 1025. And looking at what everybody else is doing, what you would do is figure out what is everyone else doing, first of all. What are their expectations? What are they conforming to? And the more information you get, the better you'll be able to answer those questions. And then you go against that in some way, maybe in as many ways as possible, maybe a few specific ways, but you have to go against the grain somehow, some way, if you're going to be wildly successful outside of the norm. All right, because if you do everything that everybody else does, then how are you going to be wildly successful? It doesn't even make sense. You can't just do it better than them. You want to do it in a way that's different from them and be better than them at the same time. So when you go against the grain, you got to make sure that you prove yourself correct. This is a very important point that needs to be added into going against the grain. I want to make sure any of you who is considering being the renegade, who goes against what the norm is in your space, your community, your business, your career, your profession, your job, whatever, understand that if and when you go against the grain, you still need to succeed. So don't just go against it to be average. You got to go against and win. Okay, you got to prove yourself correct in the process. So if you go against the grain and you fail, well, you don't get any rewards. Nothing happens. If you go against the grain and fail, depending on where you do it at and who is around to know about it, that could actually put you in a worse position. So let's say you work at a business and your boss tells you to do things a certain way, and you go against the grain and do basically things the opposite of what the boss says, but you prove yourself right. The boss might be a little annoyed, but they may, if they're open-minded enough, say, all right, you didn't obey my orders, but you did create success. So you know what? I'm glad you did that. Now you showed us a new way that we can make this happen. Now, if you go against the grain and you fail, now you might get fired because you didn't do what you were told and you messed up. So again, this is the risk that you're taking when you go against the grain. But again, with no risk, there's no reward. Okay. So this is a guy named Sam Hinkie, who was he's basically the decision maker, the personnel decision maker for the Philadelphia 76ers, my hometown NBA basketball team. My hometown is Philadelphia, by the way, for several years. And he had the Sixers in this thing, let's just call it, that he called the process. And the process was basically, he didn't say it in so many words, but this is what it was. It was the Sixers basically losing on purpose and being a pretty bad team on purpose for several years, with the strategy being the more that they lost, they would get higher draft picks. And with the high draft picks, they could pick the most talented players coming out of the amateur ranks. And then those talented players coming out of amateur ranks all gathered on one team would eventually coalesce into a good team that was winning on purpose. And the process started probably back maybe about 10 years ago-ish. So at this point, the Sixers are a solidly good team. They are making the playoffs on a relatively consistent basis. They made the playoffs every year for several years now. I'd probably say maybe 5, 6, 7 years running. So they are at least making the playoffs. Now, we haven't gotten close to competing for the championship yet, but at least making the playoffs. I talked about the process in episode number 616. The title is Respect and Trust the Process. But anyway, Sam Hinkie, when he decided to resign from his position with the Sixers, which was probably maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, he wrote basically an open letter that was letting everybody know his thoughts and why he was leaving and what his thoughts were during the entire process that the Sixers were running. And he explained that, and he used a different language, but he explained the same thing that I'm saying to you. He said, anytime you go against the conventional wisdom, you not only have to go against the grain in a way that people can see you're going against the grain, but you also have to produce a result that makes people say, oh, okay, going against the grain was actually a good idea because look at the outcome, look at the result. So again, if you go against the grain, you got to win. All right, don't go against the grain and lose, because again, even if there's no penalty, so to speak, you don't get anything for it. So you went against the grain, didn't follow what everyone else did, but nobody cares because you did not create success. So when you go against the grain, you must win. Okay, you're going to be a renegade. You got to be a successful renegade. Same thing being a renegade as going against the grain, being a renegade, same thing. Okay, renegades go against the grain by definition. So you got to prove yourself right in the end so that everybody can see that you actually had a good idea. Because there are some people who will see you going against the grain as soon as you start doing it, and they're going to be watching you to see what result you end up getting. Because even though they see you doing it, most people are not going to join you in going against the grain because most people tend to conform. And at the same time, there are going to be people who don't see you when you first start, and they never even heard of you. But if you go against the grain and succeed, then they're going to hear of you and they're going to say, wow, look at that. That person did it. So I remember when I was in my basketball days, I came out of a Division III college. It was a level that anybody who knows the sports world knows that Division III athletes don't even dream about making it pro, let alone do we actually do it. I was able to make it happen. And there are some people, a handful of people, who saw me when I first started, when I came out of that college. They knew me in college, or they knew me from growing up. And I told them I was going to go make it as a professional athlete. I doubt many people thought that I would actually be able to pull it off. There's a handful of people who saw it before I actually did it. But once I did it, a bunch of people who had never heard of me before saw me, and then they found out about the backstory. Division III college, only walked on a Division III college, only played 1 year of high school basketball. Now they're seeing the end product of it. And once they saw the end product and they found out, oh, this guy kind of went against the grain and achieved the success anyway, now they want to know, who is this guy? What's the story? Tell us more. How can I do it? Etc. So there are some people who will watch you do it from the beginning and they'll say, okay, you did it. I got to tip my hat to you. And there are other people who will not have ever heard of you from the beginning. Actually, for the most part, most people are going to be in the second group. They didn't know about you when you first started because nobody cares, because you're a nobody who's achieved nothing at this point. But then once you achieve something, now everybody knows you. Now they want to know why you did it. And it's at that point you get to tell your story. Before that, doesn't matter. Okay, so if you fail, you may have a story, but you don't get to tell the story. The only time you get to tell a story in life is when you're successful. And only time people want to know about your story is when you have achieved success, and now they want to know who's the person behind it. At that point, you can tell your story. If that does not happen, nobody cares. Simple, just simple humanity. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is how to be a renegade. Number 2, look for rules, standards, and norms that you can break and break them. Look for rules, standards, and norms that you can break and break them. This is what a renegade does. You break the rules on purpose. I remember I was listening to a speech by Arnold Schwarzenegger. This was many years ago, maybe 20 years, about 10, 15 years ago, maybe longer than that. And it was Arnold. It was one of those, the mashup videos people make on YouTube. They just find clips of some known person or unknown person, and they put a little bit of background music behind it. And it's just like a motivational mashup. So it was one of those, and it was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it took it from some speech that he was giving. And one of the things that he said in the speech was, break the rules. Don't break the laws, but break the rules. And that's exactly what renegades do. They break the rules. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a guy who broke the rules. I mean, he became a movie star here in America, and the guy still to this day has a very strong, very thick accent. You would think somebody with a thick accent like that, people can't really, maybe people had to strain to understand what he's saying. How would an American audience take this guy as a movie star? Well, exactly. That's the fact that you're asking that question is exactly the point, because all of you, without any explanation or background, knows who Arnold Schwarzenegger is, right? Why do you know who he is? Because he became a famous movie star. Everything else you know about him is based on the fact that he built his initial fame by being a famous movie star because he was willing to go against the grain. This is a challenging thing for a couple of reasons. It sounds good, but it's challenging. Here's why. Here's one reason. Most important reason is that most people are trained to conform and spend their entire lives conforming. Most people spend their entire lives doing what they are told to do, and they never consider not doing what they are told to do. So going against the grain and doing what I'm telling you here in point number 2 it would be very abnormal for most of you to even think about this, let alone to do it, because again, you've been trained your whole life to follow rules. You've been doing it, and look, you made it this far. Why start breaking rules now? Right? That's the way most people, again, subconsciously may be thinking. You may not consciously have that thought, but subconsciously, this is the way most people think. This is also why there's an opportunity there, because most people are thinking that way. Your opportunity is to think differently. The other challenge is that if you do decide to break a rule, a standard, or a norm, some people may attack you for breaking rules. Remember when that virus came out a couple of years ago, COVID, and you were told to wear this cloth mask on your face, even though we all knew logically that the cloth mask did not do anything to block breathed particles from getting right outside of the mask and going wherever they wanted to go. But everybody was told to wear a mask. And if you didn't wear a mask, what happened? People would attack you. Maybe verbally, hopefully not, but sometimes maybe even physically. People would attack you and penalize you for not wearing the mask. Or people will try to cajole you and tell you, don't do it. Don't go against the grain. Don't do this. It's a bad idea. Or they'll try to, in some way, shape, or form, punish you for not going along with the parameters that have been set for you, either by them or by somebody else. Again, most people get told rules. They want someone to tell them rules, and they spend their entire lives following rules. I remember during COVID, building I was living in, there was a woman who was in the elevator. She had two dogs with her. She had a mask on. And I remember this was during, this is like at the height of the COVID hysteria, let's call it, of the scamdemic. I said scamdemic, not pandemic. I'm pointing that out to make sure you heard me. And I remember she got in the elevator first, and then I got in the elevator, and I didn't have a mask on, and she did, and she said to me, "Do you have a mask?" And I sometimes like to just poke and prod people in this way. I pretended as if I couldn't understand her because she had a mask on, so I couldn't really understand what she was saying. So I was like, "What?" And she said, and she pointed at her face. She's like, "Do you have a mask?" And I said, "No, I don't have a mask." I smiled and said, "No, I don't have a mask." And she said, "Well, you're supposed to wear a mask." And I kind of just laughed at her and said, "I'm not wearing one." And she put her hand out in the door. In the elevator, you put your hand in the doorway so the door doesn't close. She put her hand out in the doorway and she got off the elevator. And as the door was about to close, she looked at me with this shit. It was like abject fear that she had in her eyes. And she said, "Aren't you scared?" And I laughed and said, "No," while the door was closing. So hopefully she made it on the next elevator. Now, this woman was kind of older. She was probably, who knows, 50 something years old, and she was obese. So maybe she had a reason to be scared. She had comorbidities. I had none, and hopefully she's still alive. But anyway, that happened. Another time in that same building, as a matter of fact, I was getting on the elevator on a different floor in the building, and there was a guy in there, young guy. He was probably younger than me. He had a mask on, and white guy. I got in the elevator, and he did the same thing. He said, "Do you have a mask?" And again, I said, "What?" And then he pointed at his face, like, "Do you have a mask?" And I said, "No." And he did the exact same thing. He put his hand in the door and he got off. like, uh, anyway, we have beat that dead horse often enough. The whole point is, when you go against the norms or the standards or the rules that everybody else blindly and robotically follows, people will push back on you in some way, shape, or form because you are not following the rules. It takes a special type of person who has brass balls. Brass balls. Now, that phrase, I also got to give credit to Dan Kennedy. He's the first person I heard use the phrase in that way. Brass balls and a high level of mental toughness. And that one I give credit to me. To continue to go against the grain, even when you're getting pushed back. See, it's one thing to go against the grain until you get pushed back, and then you just fall in line again. That's what most people do, even when they think about think about being a renegade. You start doing it, as soon as you get pushed back, you go right back to conforming. Now, it's a whole other thing when you decide to be a renegade, and then people push back on your renegadeness, and then you keep doing it anyway. That's a whole different level of mental toughness. It's a whole different level of resilience. It's a whole different level of audacity that you have to keep doing it, even when you're getting pushed back. Most people retreat when they get pushed back. Question is, what will you do? Most people will never even begin doing this, let alone would they follow through on it. So I want to be clear right here at this point, this is not for everybody. Right? If you want to be a renegade, understand there will be pushback. Some people will come to you with a caring tone, trying to help you, quote unquote, and telling you to not go against the grain. Other people will come to you in a attacking tone, trying to intimidate you into conforming again. Do you have the balls to ignore both of them? And when I say ignore, I don't mean you don't have to have a conversation with them. What I'm saying is you have the balls to keep doing what you're doing regardless of what happens in that interaction. Yes or no? Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is how to be a renegade. Number 3, be mentally tough enough to not succumb to external pressure to go back to conforming, which is what most people do when confronted for being renegades. So anyway, I just told you this at the end of point number 2. I just gave this one away. You had to have the mental toughness and the balls. When I say balls, ladies, I'm referring to you as well. I don't mean it literally. I mean the balls, the audacity, the temerity to not succumb to the external pressure from others who want you to go back to conforming, because whatever you're doing and being a renegade is making them uncomfortable. Usually it has nothing to do with them, but they're uncomfortable just because they see you doing something that they're not doing. The reason why people get uncomfortable when you become a renegade, when you go rogue, is not because what you're doing is directly affecting them in any way, shape, or form. It's just you doing what you want to do. It has nothing to do with them. The reason why people get uncomfortable with it is because they're used to following rules. And when they see someone like you not following the rules and it looks like it might actually work, well, what does that mean to them? Your renegade success is a mirror that you're holding up to everybody else who's a conformist. So if you go against the grain and go rogue and succeed, what does that say about all the people who've been conforming and following the rules and not succeeding? It says that they're idiots for not doing what you did. And they don't want to have to deal with that internal conversation of realizing, damn, I could have went against the grain the whole time, but I was too much of a pussy. And this person went and did it and put me on blast. And this is the way that they're seeing it. Indirectly, you are putting everybody who conforms on blast when you become a renegade and succeed, because they're all sitting there in their averageness wondering why the hell they didn't have the balls to do the same thing that you did. So instead of doing the hard part, which is them deciding to be a renegade too and going against the grain like you did, they instead do the easy thing, which is to trash and attack and go against you. And somehow you're a bad person because you're doing something that everybody else didn't do. This is in a nutshell, if you really want to know, in a nutshell, what people have against former President Donald Trump. Now, whenever you listen to this, maybe he's president again, maybe not, who knows, but everybody knows who I'm talking about, right? The general negative energy, the general reason there's so much negative energy towards Donald Trump is not because he's going to destroy democracy, whatever the fuck that means. He's going to take away people's rights. No, he's not. Because of Project 2025, or because he only cares about white men, or any of the other convenient talking points that people have against Donald Trump. That is not what people really have against the man. What people really have against Donald Trump is that he is a non-conformist. He is a renegade. He goes against the grain. He is audacious about it. He's loud about it. He is obvious about it. You cannot cajole him into going back and getting in line, and he has been able to do so successfully. That's what people really hate about him. All those other things are convenient pretexts. They're convenient talking points that sound good. They're good reasons. They're not the real reason. There's a difference between a good reason and a real reason. Good reason is, well, he has bad policy, or he sends out mean tweets to people, or he's disrespectful of women, or he only cares about white men, or he's xenophobic and doesn't like illegals, or he's racist, or he wants to take us back to the Jim Crow days, or what's the other things now? He said he's going to give immunity to the police, or he told people to inject bleach in their arms, and all these things, all the hoaxes. He said there are fine people on both sides when they had the Charlottesville situation. All the things people come up with. Some of you are listening to this right now, and those are the exact things that you don't like about Donald Trump, allegedly. The real reason people don't like him is because he went against the grain and he did it successfully. That's it. That's the real thing people don't like about him. And every time someone goes against the grain and does so successfully, they're holding up a mirror to everyone who goes with the grain and does so unsuccessfully. Because now you're looking at yourself like, damn, this person just showed me that I'm an idiot because I didn't do what they did. I want to let that point sit for a minute. And trust me, we'll talk about this a lot more as we get closer to November of 2024. I'm recording this is July. You'll probably be hearing this in August or September, but we'll be talking about this a lot more. Trust me. The point is, you got to grab your balls and say, fuck it, and keep going even when everybody else is pushing back. Now, I've read and heard many stories of people who have gone against the grain in different industries. Dan Kennedy, who I told you inspired this episode, he's one such person. I just finished watching last week. I was watching this, half watching, half listening. This docu-series is like half documentary, half biopic of a man by the name of Hugh Hefner. I think everybody's familiar with who Hugh Hefner is. He's the one who created Playboy magazine and the entire Playboy empire. And Hugh Hefner was a guy who went against the grain. A lot of people don't understand this, but Playboy magazine was the first magazine to put nude women on newsstands. That wasn't a thing before he did it. Now, they have had many imitators since, and people who took it even further than where Playboy took it, but he created the brand that is still the biggest thing when it comes to, let's say, nudity that there is, at least outside of the internet. Let's say offline, Playboy is still the biggest. Playboy is the one brand that everybody knows. Everybody knows that little bunny and they know what it means, right? And I learned many things that I didn't know about Hefner in looking at that docu-series, and that he was in many ways attacked and punished for going against the grain and building what Playboy grew to become. He was attacked many times. The Playboy magazine came out in like the 50s. So Playboy's been around a lot longer than a lot of people think. And he got attacked many times. All right, one of his assistants, for example, got caught up in basically a drummed up drug scheme, at least according to Playboy. Playboy seems like they had a big hand in making this documentary. Hugh Hefner died about 7 years ago. So whoever was involved in making the documentary, I mean, it was from their perspective. So according to them, not Playboy's, but Hugh's personal assistant who helped him with everything business-wise, she got caught up in a drug charge based on the fact that the authorities are basically trying to get Hugh Hefner, and they told her, well, if you give us some dirt on Hugh, then we'll let you go. And she told them to go screw yourselves. They took her to trial. She got found guilty, got 15 years, and she ended up committing suicide after she got the 15 years. And there was Playboy was in the for a long time. Playboy was in the casino business, and the casinos were making more money than everything else that Playboy was doing. It was basically servicing all the rest of the business was how well they were doing their casinos, specifically over in London. And they got attacked, and they had to they ended up having to get out of the casino business because they were being attacked. So Hugh Hefner and his empire got attacked many times in many ways, and the main reason was because he had gone against the grain. That's it. Now, is it possible that any of these times he got attacked, he had actually done something wrong? Possibly. I think, though, I believe the through line of all of it was that people wanted to get him because he'd gone against the grain and he had not conformed and he had won in doing so. So they wanted to attack him because of that. And that's the main reason when you see people who are renegades getting attacked over and over again is because they didn't fall in line. So one of the reasons people who go against the grain get attacked, as I said, is because it's holding up a mirror to everybody else. So they don't want you to do it because of how it will reflect on them. It has nothing to do with what you're doing for yourself. It's not that you're going to make all the money or be successful or have a bunch of followers. That's not why they care. Why they care is because of what it says about them to themselves when you succeed. So be careful. If you want to go against the grain, you better have some balls. All right, this is not for weaklings. All that said, let's recap today's class, which is how to be a renegade. The definition of a renegade is one who rejects a religion, cause, allegiance, or group for another, a deserter. Again, hat tip to Dan Kennedy for planting the seed. Number one, massive success is possible only when you decide to go against the grain and you do so successfully. You can't just go against the grain, you have to win. Number two, look for rules, standards, and norms to break and break them. This is a difficult one to do because most people have been conditioned their entire lives to just follow the rules. So breaking the rules when you've been spending the last 30 years following the rules may be more difficult than it sounds as you're listening to me talk about it, but this is a requirement. Number three, be mentally tough enough to not succumb to external pressure to go back to conforming, which is what most people do when they even try to be a renegade. Most people take 2 steps forward to being a renegade. They see the pushback that they're going to get, and they go right back to conforming. You had to have the balls to keep going anyway. Take 2 steps forward, get pushed back, and you push back against them, and you take 2 more steps, and you keep going until you reach the point of no return and you can't go back. That's where you want to get to. You can get to that, now you have potential. All that said, text me so you're in my community. My number's down below in the description. Also, workonyourgameuniversity.com. You want to work with me directly and learn how you can go against the grain in your industry and do so successfully, do so strategically, and have the mental toughness and the balls to keep doing it even when you get pushed back. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Links down below in the description to this. Work on your game. Dre, all